Hey there. A few months ago, we partnered with Phil Tetlock and the Good Judgment Institute to create a first-of-its-kind super forecasting trial in public markets. We thought that we'd actually open up this trial for one of our names so that the general public can participate. So there's a few thousand people who love to read our research, and we would love you to actually take a look at one of our favorite positions. In a best ideas portfolio, it's hard to have a favorite position, but this is our second largest position going into 2020. It's Rolls-Royce, and we've redacted one portion of the report just because it would be actually harmful for the company if that was out there from a competitive perspective. But the general report's now available on our website, and we would invite you, after you read it, to go and actually predict your most likely range of outcomes over the next few years for Rolls-Royce. In order to prepare for that, we figured we'd share a few minutes of our conversation with Phil Tetlock from September at our Investor Day, whereby we talk about the role of intuition and judgment in the midst of uncertainty. So we hope you enjoy the conversation.
So Nate Silver was actually, that was an accurate forecast. It was not the right outcome. He didn't call it right. But you can't say a 70% probability.
Well, Nate Silver was he's a famous guy. He's a celebrity, and he was more accurate than almost all of the pollsters.
Right.
He aggregated his polls. When he aggregated his polls before the 2016 election, using an algorithm not unlike the one that I described here, log odds extremizing. When he used that algorithm, he was coming up with a probability around 95% of Hillary winning. Sam Wang at Princeton went public with 95% probability. Nate Silver looked at that and he said, that's too extreme. I'm worried about correlated measurement error in the polls in the swing states of Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. If there's correlated measurement error and those states are pretty close, if one of them goes against Hillary, the others are likely to go as well. And she could have a big electoral college loss, even though she's ahead in the popular vote. So he said, I'm not going to turn my 95% into 90% Trump's going to win. I'm going to downgrade to 70. At 70% Hillary victory as opposed to 95%. So he was actually using intuition and judgment to moderate what the algorithm would otherwise have directed him to do based on the aggregate of the polls.
It sounds like you're in the Cline camp on Danny Kahneman and Gary Cline on intuition. You rely on intuition a little bit more than Kahneman would.
When you have two people who are that smart, I think it's a good idea to try to split the difference.
You're in the middle. Okay. Actually, can we talk, since I brought up Kahneman, can you talk a little bit about your work with him that you're doing on noise reduction right now? And from what I understand,
that's work he's doing totally separately from me.
Totally separate,
But
okay.
I'm aware that he's doing that.
Okay, I thought you were working with him.
Well, we have a project that might be useful to him. We'll see. I think the interesting thing that I'm excited about the book that he's working on, that Danny Kahneman's working on noise, because it strikes me as such a valuable complement to his profoundly influential book on bias, which is Thinking Fast and Slow. Bias is about systematic error. Right? You're systematically underconfident. You're systematically overconfident. You can measure it. You can see it. Noise is random. By its nature, it's very, very difficult to observe. But there are ways of observing it, by creating things like noise audits, for example. So if you were to take 3 of your financial analysts and show them the same report and ask them, if this report were true, what price should this company be valued at?
Yep.
That's almost a textbook MBA sort of exercise. If the 3 financial analysts each gives you very different information from reading the same report and assuming that report is true, that means you have noise.
Got it.
And that's error in your system that you'd like to suppress.
And that happens all the time on Wall Street as well.
So some people would argue that the lowest hanging fruit for improving judgment may be noise reduction. I mean, bias reduction, and from a Kahneman point of view, is very difficult because of that Miller-Lyer illusion I showed you.
Yeah.
The biases are very, very sticky. It's much more natural to think, what a happy couple, they're going to stay together, than, what are the base rates? One type of cognition comes much more naturally to people. You have to pull out the ruler from Miller-Lyer, right, to figure out which lines are longer. But you still see them you still see them incorrectly, even after the ruler is removed.
Yep.
So that makes Danny Kahneman quite pessimistic about bias reduction. but he may be somewhat more optimistic about noise reduction. And it may be that noise reduction will be the topic du jour when his book comes out in 2020 or whenever.
Yeah, exactly. How do I present fundamental information to people without getting them to just migrate to the center, the center of that path?
That's a really good question. That's hard. We're working on that in a new IARPA tournament. I don't like binary questions. I don't like yes/no questions. I don't like yes, maybe, no questions. I prefer questions that do measure probability distributions and more or less continuously. And I think you should put people, forecasters, on notice that trying to game this system and assuming that we've centered each distribution around what we think is the correct answer is a good way to lose. You don't want them to take away the implicit message that we created these probability distributions with the middle in mind.
Got it. So have randomness to the path that we're demonstrating in all these fundamentals so that we're forcing them to make an adjustment.
One would think.
Yeah.
We don't want them to try to game the system.
Yeah. Can you actually talk a little bit about your research that you're working on right now in the phase 2 of the trial that you just finished?
Yes, it's really exciting.
This week.
We're having a wonderful time. It's a research program called Focus, and it's not about predicting things in the real world. It's a big change for me. It's about predicting things in simulated worlds. So we just did a problem on a simulated epidemic and predicting how bad would an epidemic be. Or we make predictions and simulations of geopolitical simulations. When you have that, you actually know what the counterfactuals are. You know what would have happened if something different had happened. The counterfactuals in the real world are absolutely unattainable. Liberals and conservatives are still arguing to this day over whether Reagan won, lost, or had no effect on the Cold War.
Yeah.
Take away the Reagan presidency, and liberals are quite convinced the Cold War ends roughly as it did. Take away the Reagan presidency, and conservatives are quite convinced the Soviet Union is probably still alive and kicking. And nobody can go back in time, undo the Reagan presidency, replace it with a 2-term Carter presidency and a Mondale follow-up. You still get you can't do that. You can't have a time machine. You can't go back and do that. Or you can't go back in time and did the famous Kahneman thought experiment about Hitler being born as a girl. How often do you get World War II if Hitler had been born in 1889 as a girl as opposed to a boy? It's very unlikely a girl could have risen to the leadership of the Nazi Party, given sexual norms. That seems vanishingly unlikely. So, does World War II still happen? Now, who knows? With Hitler, it occurs 42% of the time, and without Hitler, it occurs 2% of the time. That would be a huge Hitler effect, right?
Yeah.
And because there's no guarantee Hitler would have risen to take over the Nazi Party. I mean, there are these. At any rate, so you don't know in the real world what the counterfactuals are, and this makes it really hard to learn lessons from history. So what they want to do is they want to train people to get better at learning from history. And the way to do that is create simulated worlds where there's a ground truth about what happened, the what ifs.
Yeah.
And you can measure, how bad would the epidemic have been if you closed the schools earlier, or how would a war have broken out if there had been mutual assured destruction between these two powers, or the sort of debate about how close did we come to World War III, or how close are we now to World War III?
And you're structuring that. You guys are answering these counterfactuals in super teams.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, and it's just a very, very demanding exercise. It places more cognitive demands on the forecasters than I've ever seen before. If you wanted a winnowing mechanism, to look for not only super forecasters but super forecasters, you'd probably create something like Focus, which is extremely demanding.
Is this because you're just on 7th, 8th, 9th derivative? You're just like, and then what, and then what, and then is that?
It's very difficult. It requires people to be very flexible. You certainly have a skillful designer of questions. In Applied Physics Lab at Hopkins is creating the questions, and they don't make the mistake that you're describing earlier of, the right answer is always sort of in the middle.
Yeah.
Sometimes the right answer is really clumped somewhere, and you have to think very deeply and carefully about the causal and the statistical structure of the world. You have to be able to move very skillfully back and forth between words and numbers. Think about the interview with the MEI CEO.
Yeah.
I mean, there were a lot of words going back and forth, and he could be 100% right. My takeaway is if he's 100% right, then the likelihood of that particular drug he was talking about going through is very high, above 90%. But of course, I'm more in the super forecasting tradition, so I have these base rates in my mind and I have more reservations.
Dan's not here to clarify. I know I can help clarify, but before we leave focus, it sounds like it's almost rhyming with game theory in some respects, right? Or I can see as we go into negotiating with a hostile regulator, it almost has negotiating aspects to it, or going through counterfactual scenarios is something you would want to do going into a negotiation with someone on the other side of the table. No,
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
The people, the professors who are involved who have game theory expertise think naturally this way. That's just their default mode of thinking. And again, it's another example, incidentally, of how very in-depth professional training can change your way of thinking from the normal human default mode. Most people don't think in a really disciplined way about counterfactuals. Most people don't think in a really disciplined way about probabilities, but they can be trained to do it. And they can get pretty good at it.
I mean, because I'm thinking, just as you were talking, we're going to talk about Sergio Marchionne, the CEO of Fiat Chrysler, and no CEO wanted to negotiate with him on M&A mergers and acquisitions because they knew they would lose. And all Sergio said is, all I do is I put myself in their shoes, which very few people do, according to him. I'm guessing very similarly but you've got to be going way beyond that.
Well, that's certainly one of Annie Duke's lessons in her poker seminars too, right?
Yeah.
Is, think if you had a really strong hand, what would you do? Teaching people the logic of bluffing. I mean, why has it been so hard to get artificial intelligence playing world-class poker? Now, by the way, they seem to have arrived. But the big challenge for world-class poker and AI was the logic of bluffing.
In a market parallel.
Making yourself unpredictable.
Yeah. In a market parallel, I wonder if machines can ever get to the point of predicting the irrationality of the market in some respects. Anyway, that's a TBD. Do you have any insight?
Well, you've got a lot of very deep-pocketed companies putting a lot of money into a lot of fancy AI systems. So
we're not going to try to compete against those. We need a super team.
I hope you enjoyed that. We're going to have more to come on actually Greenwood's efforts in noise reduction. But in the meantime, please read that Rolls research report and actually participate in our super forecasting trial. Thank you very much. Have a great day.